The ink was still wet. That's what I noticed first when I found Brother Nathaniel's manuscript, the number 666 written across every page in what I thought was red ink, still glistening, still wet to the touch even though he'd been dead for 3 weeks. When I touched it, the liquid moved, crawling across my fingertip like it was alive, like it was tasting me, and then it began to write on my skin, carving the number into my flesh without pain, without blood, just this terrible warmth that spread up my arm toward my heart. Brother Elias grabbed my wrist and whispered the only words that mattered, "Don't let it reach your heart. Once it writes the number there, you belong to the promise. And the promise never lets you leave. Before we descend into this nightmare together, I need you to do something crucial. Hit that subscribe button right now. After what I'm about to share, you'll want to follow every story on this channel. And down in the comments, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Are you alone? Check your surroundings. This story has a peculiar way of manifesting in the lives of those who hear it. What you're about to hear is based on documents discovered in 1923 within the sealed vault of St. Malachy's Monastery in the Appalachian Mountains of Virginia. The papers were found preserved in a lead box lined with pages torn from Bibles, each page marked with the number 666. The author identified himself as Jonathan Whitmore, a scribe who came to the monastery in 1798. 3 archivists who studied these documents reported seeing the number 666 appearing spontaneously on their skin before suffering psychological breakdowns. 1 disappeared entirely. This is Jonathan's testimony, and God have mercy on us for bringing it to light. My name is Jonathan Whitmore, and I arrived at St. Malachy's Monastery in the autumn of 1798, seeking refuge from a world that had grown too loud, too violent, too consumed with the aftermath of revolution and war. I had worked as a scribe in Philadelphia, copying legal documents and letters for merchants and politicians, and the endless parade of human greed and stupidity had worn my soul thin. I thought a monastery might offer peace, a chance to use my skills in service of something higher than commerce. I could not have been more wrong about the peace. But I was right that my skills would be needed, just not in the way I'd imagined. St. Malachy's sat deep in the Virginia mountains, accessible only by a narrow road that wound through forests so dense that daylight barely penetrated them. The monastery itself was built of gray stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, a severe structure of sharp angles and narrow windows that looked more like a prison than a place of worship. A bell tower rose from its center, but I noticed immediately that there was no bell, just an empty arch through which the wind howled like a voice trying to form words. Brother Elias met me at the gate. He was perhaps 40, with the careful movements of a man who had learned to navigate dangerous spaces. His eyes were the color of winter sky, and they held a wariness that immediately put me on edge. "You're the new scribe," he said. It wasn't a question. "Good. We need someone who can read and write." Brother Nathaniel was our scribe, but he... Elias paused, choosing his words carefully. He encountered difficulties in his work. "We hope you'll have better fortune." "What kind of difficulties?" Elias's jaw tightened. "The kind we don't discuss before dark. Come. I'll show you to your cell and the scriptorium. The abbot will want to meet you before vespers." He led me through corridors lit by oil lamps that cast more shadow than light. The walls were bare stone, devoid of decoration except for one recurring element that made my skin crawl, the number 666, carved into the stone at irregular intervals, sometimes small and discreet, sometimes large enough to fill entire sections of wall. Each carving looked fresh, the edges sharp and clean, as if they'd been made yesterday rather than whenever the monastery was built. "What are these numbers?" I asked, stopping before a particularly large example. "Reminders," Elias said curtly. "Come. Don't linger near them too long." My cell was sparse, a wooden bed, a small desk, a shelf for books. There was a crucifix on the wall, but I noticed with unease that it hung upside down. When I pointed this out to Elias, his face paled. "It does that," he whispered. "We've nailed it right side up 100 times. It always inverts by morning. We've learned to leave it be. That's not possible. Many impossible things happen here, Jonathan. You'll learn that soon enough." He moved toward the door, then paused. "A word of advice. When you work in the scriptorium, when you copy the texts the abbot assigns you, never, and I mean never, write the number 666. Not for any reason, not even in jest. The ink we use here is special. It remembers things. And some things, once written, cannot be unwritten." Before I could ask what he meant, he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the corridor with unnatural resonance, as if the stones themselves were amplifying the sound. I attended Vespers that evening in the chapel. 19 monks knelt in their pews. I counted them carefully, noting that several empty pews suggested the monastery had once housed many more. Their voices rose in a Latin chant I didn't recognize, the rhythm strange and unsettling, each phrase ending on a note that made my teeth ache. At the front of the chapel, where an altar should have been, there was instead a massive stone lectern, and upon that lectern sat the largest book I had ever seen, a tome bound in what looked like human skin, its pages yellow with age. The abbot stood behind the lectern, a tall man with a face like carved granite and eyes that reflected the lamplight in a way that human eyes shouldn't. When the chant ended, he looked directly at me, and I felt as though he could see through my flesh to the sins I carried in my heart. "Brother Jonathan," he said, his voice resonant and commanding, "welcome to St. Malachy's. You come at a crucial time. Our previous scribe, Brother Nathaniel, left us with an unfinished work, a manuscript of vital importance that must be completed. You will take up his task. You will finish what he began. And you will do so with absolute precision, for a single error could have consequences beyond your comprehension." "What manuscript, Father Abbot?" "You'll see it tomorrow when you begin work in the scriptorium. For now, I will tell you only this: we are engaged in a great work here at St. Malachy's. A work that bridges the gap between this world and the next. A work that requires perfect transcription, perfect fidelity to the original text." Brother Nathaniel lost his way. He began to change the words, to alter the numbers, thinking he could outsmart what he was copying. He learned, too late, that some texts change those who attempt to change them. The abbot's hand reached out and touched the massive book on the lectern. "This is the Codex Maleficarum, the Book of Curses. It contains every curse, every hex, every dark promise ever made between mortal and devil. It was compiled over centuries by a secret order within the Church, men who believed that by recording these evils, they could contain them, control them, render them harmless through documentation. They were wrong. The book grew. It feeds on additions. And now it demands completion." I felt my mouth go dry. Completion. There is one curse that remains unfinished. One dark promise that was interrupted before it could be fully recorded. Your task, your only task, is to copy the final pages of Brother Nathaniel's manuscript into this book. 666 pages remain blank. They must be filled before the winter solstice, 6 weeks from now. If they are not— the abbot paused, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. "If they are not, the unfinished curse will manifest. And it will consume not just this monastery, but everything within 100 miles. That night, I lay awake in my cell, staring at the inverted crucifix, wondering what madness I had walked into. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the corridor, slow, dragging footsteps accompanied by a sound like something wet being pulled across stone. The footsteps stopped outside my door, and I heard breathing, ragged, labored, wrong. "Jonathan Whitmore," a voice said, and it wasn't quite human. The words were formed correctly, but the voice behind them was layered, multiple tones speaking in imperfect unison. "Jonathan Whitmore, the scribe who doesn't yet know what he'll write. Jonathan Whitmore, whose hands will betray him. Jonathan Whitmore, who will write the number whether he wants to or not. The ink remembers. The ink knows. The ink is already preparing for you." The footsteps resumed, moving away down the corridor. I waited until silence returned before daring to open my door. The hallway was empty, but on the floor outside my cell, I found something that made my blood freeze, a handprint, pressed into the stone as if the rock had been soft clay. And in the center of that handprint, carved deep and clean, was the number 666. I should have left immediately. I should have gathered my belongings and fled into the mountains, even if it meant dying of exposure in the November cold. But I was a man of reason, a scribe who believed in documentation and evidence. I told myself there were rational explanations. The monks were playing tricks on the newcomer. The abbot was mad and his madness was contagious. The carvings in the walls were old, and my tired mind was making connections that didn't exist. I was wrong about all of it. The next morning, Brother Elias led me to the scriptorium. It was a long, narrow room on the monastery's top floor, with windows facing north to provide steady, indirect light. 12 desks lined the walls, but only one was occupied, by a monk so ancient and withered he looked more corpse than man. He didn't acknowledge our presence, just continued scratching away at the page before him with a quill that made a sound like screaming when it touched paper. "That's Brother Ambrose," Elias whispered. "Don't disturb him. He's been copying the same page for 3 years. He made an error early on, wrote the number by accident. and now he can't stop. The ink won't let him. He writes the same words over and over, trying to get them right, but every time he reaches the place where the number should be, his hand writes it anyway, against his will. We feed him. We keep him alive. But he's not really here anymore. He's trapped in the page, living in the moment of his mistake forever. I stared at Brother Ambrose in horror. As I watched, his hand moved across the page in fluid, mechanical motions, the quill dancing through the same patterns again and again. And when he reached a certain point, his hand jerked, moved independently of his will, and carved the number 666 into the page. His face contorted in anguish, a single tear rolling down his cheek, but he didn't stop writing. He couldn't stop. "This is Brother Nathaniel's desk," Elias said, guiding me to a workspace by the largest window. The desk was covered in dried blood, or what I thought was blood until I touched it and realized it was ink. Red ink that had spilled across the surface, pooling in the grain of the wood, forming patterns that looked almost like writing. And everywhere in those patterns, hidden in the swirls and curves, I could see it, the number, repeated endlessly, as if the ink itself was obsessed with it. "The manuscript is in the drawer," Elias said. "Brother Nathaniel's final work. The abbot wants you to read it through today, familiarize yourself with his style and content. Tomorrow, you'll begin the transcription into the Codex Malficarum." "But Jonathan," his hand gripped my shoulder with surprising strength. "Remember what I told you. Never write the number. No matter what the manuscript says. No matter how clearly it instructs you to write it. The ink we use here, the blood ink, it comes from somewhere else. Somewhere dark. And it has its own will. It wants to be written. It wants to form that number. You must resist it with every fiber of your being, or you'll end up like Brother Ambrose. Or worse, like Brother Nathaniel." "What happened to Brother Nathaniel?" Elias's face went gray. "Read the manuscript. You'll understand. Just, prepare yourself. Some knowledge scars the soul." He left me alone in the scriptorium with the ancient Brother Ambrose and the blood-stained desk. I sat down carefully, avoiding the worst of the ink stains, and opened the drawer. Inside was a manuscript bound in leather that felt wrong to the touch, too warm, too soft, almost like living skin. The pages were covered in elegant script, each letter perfectly formed, each line perfectly straight. Brother Nathaniel had been a master scribe, far more skilled than I would ever be. But as I began to read, I noticed something disturbing. Every few pages, the handwriting would change subtly, the letters growing more agitated, the lines wavering, the ink darker and thicker. And on certain pages, the number 666 appeared, written in that same red ink that covered the desk. The number was always crossed out, scratched over violently, as if Brother Nathaniel had been trying to erase his own mistake. But the ink remained visible beneath the scratches, gleaming wet and fresh no matter how old the page. The content of the manuscript was worse than its appearance. Brother Nathaniel had been copying a curse, an ancient text called The Dark Promise of the Antichrist, allegedly written in the 1st century by a heretic who claimed to have conversed with the beast of Revelation. The curse was written as a contract, a legally binding agreement between the writer and forces of darkness. And the terms were simple: write the number 666 exactly 666 times in blood ink, and you would gain the power to command the dead, to speak with demons, to see into the future and the past. But if you failed to complete all 666 repetitions, if you made even a single error or left the work unfinished, the curse would reverse. Instead of granting power, it would claim your soul. Not after death, immediately. Your consciousness would be trapped in the ink itself, forced to experience eternal repetition of your failure, forever trying and failing to correct your mistake. Brother Nathaniel had written the number 665 times. One short. And according to the dates on the manuscript, he had spent 3 years trying to write that final instance, his hand refusing to obey him, his will broken by the ink's terrible intelligence. The last entry in the manuscript was dated 3 weeks ago, the day Brother Nathaniel had died. The handwriting was barely legible, jagged and desperate. I understand now. The ink doesn't want to be complete. It feeds on incompletion, on failure, on the eternal effort to finish what cannot be finished. It showed me the truth tonight. There is no 666th instance. The curse was designed to be endless. Every time you think you're writing the final number, the ink changes the count. It adds one more, then one more, then one more, forever. I've been writing for 3 years, and I'm still at 665. I will always be at 665. And now the ink is inside me. I can feel it moving through my veins, replacing my blood, turning me into a manuscript. When I die, and I will die soon, I can feel my heart slowing, the ink will be released. It will seek a new scribe. It will find you, whoever you are. And it will do to you what it did to me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I tried to warn the abbot, but he doesn't believe me. He thinks I simply failed, that I was too weak. He doesn't understand that the ink is alive, that it hunts, the entry ended mid-sentence, the last word trailing off into a smear of red ink that had never dried. I stared at that smear, and as I watched, it moved. Just slightly. A ripple across its surface, like a drop of water disturbed by an invisible touch. And then it began to write. Letters formed in the wet ink, emerging from the smear like creatures crawling out of a pool. They spelled out a message, one word at a time, with agonizing slowness. Hello, Jonathan. I have been waiting for you. I slammed the manuscript shut, my heart hammering, my hands shaking. But when I looked down at my fingers, I saw that they were stained red, not with ink, but with something that looked exactly like the substance covering Brother Nathaniel's desk. And as I watched in horror, that red liquid began to move, crawling across my skin, forming shapes, forming letters, forming numbers. It was writing the number 666 on my palm. I ran to the basin in the corner of the scriptorium and plunged my hands into the water, scrubbing frantically, trying to wash away the red stain. But it wouldn't come off. It sank deeper into my skin with every touch, as if my flesh was absorbing it, welcoming it, becoming one with it. Don't bother, a voice said behind me. I spun around to see Brother Ambrose looking at me with eyes that were finally aware, finally present. Once the blood ink touches you, it never leaves. It's in you now. In your skin. In your blood. And soon, it will reach your heart. When it does, you'll understand what Brother Nathaniel understood. You'll see what the dark promise really is. What is it? I gasped. What is the promise? Ambrose's face contorted in something between a smile and a grimace. It's simple, really. The ink promises that if you write the number 666 exactly 666 times, you'll be free. Free of guilt, free of sin, free of the weight of your soul. But the trick, the terrible trick, is that you never reach 666. The ink makes sure of it. It changes the count. It alters your perception. It makes you believe you're always one away, always almost there, always just about to succeed. And that hope, that endless almost success, is more addictive than any drug. You'll write the number again and again, thinking each time might be the last, never realizing that there is no last. There is only more writing. Forever. He turned back to his desk, his hand already moving across the page again, the quill scratching out the same words he'd written 10,000 times before. Run if you can, Jonathan. Run while the ink is still just on your skin. Once it reaches your heart, you'll want to stay. You'll want to write. And you'll never stop wanting it until you're dead. Maybe not even then. I did run. I ran from the scriptorium, down the stairs, through the corridors, toward the main gate. But when I reached it, I found the abbot standing there, blocking my path, his face grave but unsurprised. You've touched the manuscript, he said. You've let the blood ink mark you. There's no leaving now, Jonathan. The ink won't permit it. If you try to flee beyond the monastery walls, it will consume you completely. Your only chance, is to fight it from within. To transcribe the manuscript into the codex without writing the number. To complete the curse without completing it. Brother Nathaniel failed because he tried to finish the work. You must succeed by refusing to finish it. That's insane. How can I transcribe a curse about writing a specific number without writing that number? By being smarter than the ink. By finding ways to indicate the number without writing it. By using symbols, references, allusions. The codex doesn't care if the curse is completed perfectly. It only cares that something is written in those blank pages. Give it words, any words, and it will be satisfied. The blood ink, however, cares very much about writing the number. It lives for those 3 digits. Deny it that satisfaction, and you might survive. The abbot stepped aside, but his eyes held a warning. You have 6 weeks until the winter solstice. 6 weeks to fill 666 pages with text that contains but does not contain the number you must never write. 6 weeks to outwit an intelligence that has been collecting souls for centuries. Brother Nathaniel lasted 3 years before the ink broke him. How long will you last, I wonder? That night, I examined my hands carefully by candlelight. The red stain had spread. It now covered both palms completely, and tendrils of it were creeping up my wrists like vines, like veins, like the fingers of something trying to climb inside me. And in the pattern of that spreading stain, I could see it clearly now, the number, repeated over and over in microscopic script, thousands of instances of 666 written in ink so small it was almost invisible but undeniably there. The blood ink was already writing on me, and I hadn't even touched a quill yet. I knew then that I was trapped. The monastery, the manuscript, the curse. They were all part of a machine designed to consume scribes, to turn skilled writers into fuel for something ancient and hungry. And I was the latest sacrifice, the newest soul to be fed to the dark promise. But I was also something Brother Nathaniel hadn't been. I was a commercial scribe, trained not in religious texts but in legal documents, contracts, and letters. I knew how to find loopholes. I knew how to write things that seemed to say one thing but actually said another. I knew how to play games with words. If the blood ink wanted to play a game, I would play. But I would play to win. The next morning, I returned to the scriptorium with a plan. I sat at Brother Nathaniel's blood-stained desk, opened the manuscript to the first page that needed transcribing, and prepared my materials. The abbot had provided me with special paper, thick vellum that felt cold to the touch, and a quill made from a black feather I didn't recognize. And beside these, a small bottle of ink. The blood ink. It was red, viscous, and it moved in the bottle even when sitting perfectly still, swirling in patterns that hurt to watch. When I uncorked the bottle, a smell hit me, not unpleasant, but wrong. It smelled like copper and roses and something else, something that reminded me of a slaughterhouse I'd walked past once in Philadelphia, the stench of death and butchery mixed with an almost sweet undertone. I dipped the quill into the ink, and the moment it touched the liquid, I felt it. A jolt of sensation that ran up my arm, through my shoulder, straight to my heart. The ink recognized me. It knew I was there. And it was eager, God, it was so eager, to write. My hand wanted to move, wanted to write, wanted to form those 3 digits that appeared everywhere in the manuscript. But I fought it. I focused on the first sentence I needed to copy, and I wrote, in the beginning of Dark Promises, there came a number that shall not be named. The ink fought me. It tried to pull my hand toward writing the forbidden digits. But I held firm, using circumlocution instead of direct statement, implication instead of declaration. And slowly, painfully, I filled the first page with text that described the number without ever writing it. When I finished, I felt exhausted, as if I'd been wrestling with a living thing. The red stain on my hands had darkened, spreading further up my arms. But I had succeeded. 1 page down. 665 to go. That night, Brother Elias brought me dinner in my cell. He looked at my arms and his face fell. It's spreading faster than I thought, he said quietly. Brother Nathaniel spread slowly, over months. Yours is racing. You must be fighting it hard. I have to fight it. What choice do I have? You could give in. Write the number. Feed the ink what it wants. The pain would stop. The struggle would end. You'd find peace in the repetition, like Brother Ambrose did. That's not peace. That's damnation. Elias nodded slowly. Yes. But sometimes damnation feels better than resistance. Remember that, Jonathan, in the weeks to come. When the ink whispers to you, when it shows you how easy it would be to just write those 3 digits, when it promises that the 666th instance will truly be the last, remember that it's lying. It always lies. The only truth is the struggle. The only freedom is in never surrendering. He left me with those words, and I tried to sleep. But in my dreams, I saw numbers. Millions of them. Billions. All of them the same 3 digits, repeated in every possible configuration, covering every surface, filling every space, until there was nothing in the universe but that one number repeated infinitely. And in the center of that numerical universe, I saw Brother Nathaniel. He was made of ink now, his body just a walking manuscript, every inch of his skin covered in writing. And he was still trying to write the 666th instance, his hand moving frantically across his own chest, carving numbers into his flesh with fingers that were themselves made of dried blood ink. Help me, he whispered. I'm so close. Just one more. Just one more and I'll be free. But even as he wrote, the numbers on his body shifted, rearranged themselves, reset the count back to 665. Forever 665. Forever one away from completion. I woke screaming. The days that followed blurred into a nightmare of constant writing. I would sit at the desk from dawn until long after dark, filling page after page with text that danced around the forbidden number, that hinted at it and suggested it and described it without ever committing it to paper. And every day, the ink fought me harder. It began to write on its own. I would look down at a finished page and find that words had changed, that sentences had rearranged themselves, that the number had appeared in places I was certain I hadn't written it. I would have to tear out pages and start over, and each torn page felt like tearing out a piece of my own flesh. The red stain spread. Up my arms. Across my chest. Down my legs. By the end of the first week, I looked like I'd been dipped in blood, my skin marked with that terrible red that never dried, that never stopped moving, that constantly formed and reformed the number I was forbidden to write. By the second week, I began to hear it. The ink had a voice. It whispered to me as I wrote, a constant murmuring in a language I didn't know but somehow understood. It told me about the dark promise, about the entity that had created it, about the purpose of the curse. The dark promise was not a contract with a devil or demon. It was something far older and stranger. It was a mathematical virus, a conceptual parasite that spread through the act of writing. Every time someone wrote the number 666 in blood ink, they created a link to the source, to a dimension of pure numerology where abstract concepts had consciousness and will. And the number 666, being the number of the beast, being charged with centuries of fear and superstition and mystical significance, had gained a kind of life. It wanted to be written. It needed to be written. And it would consume anyone who tried to write it, because the act of writing it fed it, strengthened it, brought it closer to full manifestation in our world. Brother Nathaniel had understood this too late. He had tried to complete the curse, thinking that finishing it would satisfy the entity and free him. But completion was impossible. The curse was designed to be eternal. The 666th instance would never come because the entity didn't want completion, it wanted eternal effort, eternal failure, eternal feeding from the souls of those who tried and failed. But you're smart, the ink whispered to me as I wrote. You're not trying to complete it. You're trying to avoid it. That makes you interesting. That makes you a challenge. I wonder how long you'll hold out. Days? Weeks? Everyone breaks eventually. Everyone writes the number. The only question is when. By the third week, I was barely sleeping. The dreams had become too vivid, too real. I would dream that I was writing the number, and wake to find it carved into my skin, into my mattress, into the walls of my cell. I would spend hours each morning scrubbing away the evidence of the ink's nighttime activities, trying to erase what it had written while I slept. Brother Elias found me one morning, collapsed at my desk, surrounded by torn pages. I had worked through the night and discovered that everything I'd written had been corrupted. The ink had gone back through every page I'd completed and inserted the number, cleverly hidden in a flow of text, embedded in the shapes of other letters, encrypted in patterns I hadn't noticed while writing. 3 weeks of work. Ruined. I can't do this, I sobbed. It's too strong. It changes what I write. It won't let me succeed. Elias knelt beside me, his face sympathetic but firm. Then don't try to succeed. Stop trying to complete the 666 pages. The abbot was wrong, you can't outweed the ink by filling those pages. The moment you try to complete any work, the ink will corrupt it. But what if you didn't try to complete anything? What if you just wrote? I don't understand. Write about yourself. Write about this experience. Document what's happening to you. Not as part of the curse, not as a transcription of Brother Nathaniel's manuscript, but as a warning to whoever comes next. The ink wants you to write the curse. Deny it that. Give it something else. Give it the truth. It was a radical idea. Abandon the abbot's command to transcribe the manuscript. Abandon the effort to fill the 666 pages of the codex. Instead, create a new work entirely, a testimony, a warning, a record of what happened when a scribe encountered the blood ink and refused to surrender. But would the ink allow it? Would it permit me to write anything other than what it wanted? There was only one way to find out. I took a fresh page. I dipped the quill in the blood ink. And I began to write, not Brother Nathaniel's words, but my own. My name is Jonathan Whitmore, and I am writing to warn you about the blood ink that never dries. The ink resisted. It tried to pull my hand away from these words, tried to force me back to copying the curse. But I fought it with everything I had, and slowly, so slowly, I began to gain ground. Because the ink, for all its power, had a weakness. It thrived on fear. It fed on the desperation of those trying to complete an impossible task. But I was no longer trying to complete anything. I was simply writing, recording, testifying. And testimony, unlike curse work, has no rigid structure, no required phrases, no forbidden words or numbers. I could write about the number 666 without writing it. I could describe its effect without reproducing it. I could tell the story without repeating the curse. The ink realized what I was doing. And it grew angry. That night, it came for me in a way it hadn't before. I woke to find myself filled with red mist, ink transformed to vapor, hanging in the air like blood-colored fog. And in that mist, I saw shapes. Faces. Brother Nathaniel was there, his features formed from swirling ink, his mouth open in a silent scream. Brother Ambrose was there, still making the motions of writing even in vapor form. And others, dozens of others, monks I didn't recognize, all of them consumed by the ink, all of them trapped in eternal repetition of their failure. Join us, they whispered in unison. Write the number. Complete the promise. Find peace in repetition. There is no peace in what you have, I said, my voice shaking. There's only endless failure. Then why do you keep writing? Brother Nathaniel's vapor face asked. Why do you struggle if not to complete something? What do you hope to achieve? I don't hope to achieve anything, I said, and in speaking those words, I felt something shift. A weight lifting. A chain breaking. I'm not writing to complete a task. I'm writing because writing is what I am. I'm a scribe. And scribes write. The outcome doesn't matter. The completion doesn't matter. Only the act of writing matters. The vapor shapes recoiled, as if I'd struck them. And in that moment, I understood the true nature of the dark promise. It wasn't about completing 666 instances of the number. It was about tricking scribes into believing that completion was possible, that success was just one more repetition away. It fed on hope. On the desperate belief that this time, finally, the work would be finished. But if you abandoned hope for completion, if you embraced writing for its own sake rather than for any goal, the promise had no power over you. The vapor dissipated. The shapes fled. And I returned to my desk with renewed purpose. For the next 3 weeks, I wrote. Not the curse. Not Brother Nathaniel's manuscript. Not the 666 pages demanded by the Codex. Instead, I wrote this testament. This warning. This record of what happens when the blood ink finds a new victim. And as I wrote, a strange thing happened. The red stain on my skin began to fade. Not quickly, it took days to notice any change. But gradually, incrementally, the ink was leaving me. It was being absorbed back into the pages, back into the words I was writing, back into the testimony I was creating. The ink wanted to be permanent. But testimony, by its nature, is transitory. It records a moment, then moves on to the next moment. It doesn't try to capture eternity in static repetition. And that transitory nature was poison to something that wanted to exist forever. By the 5th week, my skin was almost clear. The red stain remained only on my hands, the parts of me that touched the quill most frequently. But even there, it was fading, losing its grip, releasing me from its influence. The abbot was not pleased. He visited the scriptorium on the first day of the 6th week and saw immediately that I had abandoned his assignment. You were supposed to fill the pages of the Codex, he said, his voice cold with fury. You were supposed to complete the transcription. The winter solstice is in 1 week. If those pages remain blank, then let them remain blank, I interrupted. The curse doesn't need to be completed, Father Abbot. In fact, it can't be completed. That's the whole point. The dark promise is designed to be eternal, to trap scribes in endless repetition. By refusing to play its game, by refusing to try to complete it, I've broken its hold. The abbot's face went pale. You don't understand what you've done. The Codex must be fed. It requires words. It requires blood, I said quietly. Specifically, the blood of scribes who believe they can master the curse. You've been feeding it for decades, haven't you? Bringing in scribes, telling them they need to complete the manuscript, watching as the ink consumes them and their suffering is absorbed into the Codex. You're not trying to contain curses. You're cultivating them. You're feeding them. The abbot's silence was answer enough. Why? I asked. Why do this? Why sacrifice so many souls? For a long moment, the abbot didn't speak. Then he walked to the window and looked out at the mountains, his back to me. Because the alternative is worse, he said softly. Do you know what happens if the Codex isn't fed? If those pages remain blank past the solstice? You said the curse would manifest. Not the curse, the abbot corrected. The hunger. The Codex itself is alive, Jonathan. It's not a book that contains curses, it's a curse that contains itself. Every word written in it feeds its existence. Every soul consumed by the blood ink strengthens its binding. Without that feeding, without that constant sacrifice, it will break free of its covers. It will spread. Every curse, every hex, every dark promise contained in its pages will be released simultaneously. Plagues. Madness. Death on a scale you cannot imagine. He turned to face me, and I saw genuine terror in his eyes. We are not the villains in this story, Jonathan. We are the wardens. The jailers. We sacrifice a few to save thousands. We feed the Codex scribes who are already drawn to dark knowledge, who come here seeking forbidden wisdom. Better that they be consumed here, contained within these walls, than have the Codex's hunger spread to the innocent. That's monstrous. Yes, the abbot agreed. It is absolutely monstrous. But it's necessary. And now, because of your rebellion, because of your refusal to complete the feeding, we are 6 days away from catastrophe. Unless you can find a way to fill those pages before the solstice, everyone within 100 miles will suffer for your principles. He left me with that weight, that terrible knowledge. And I sat at Brother Nathaniel's desk, staring at the pages I had written, at the testimony that had saved my soul but might doom thousands of others. Brother Elias found me hours later, still sitting there, paralyzed by impossible choice. The abbot told me what he told you, Elias said quietly. He's not lying about the Codex. I've seen what happens when it's denied. 10 years ago, we went 3 months without a scribe. The monastery itself began to change. The walls bled. The stones screamed. And in the town at the base of the mountain, people started dying in ways that matched the curses in the Codex exactly. The abbot brought in Brother Nathaniel, and the dying stopped. The Codex was satisfied. So what do I do? I asked, my voice broken. I can't complete the curse. The ink will consume me. But I can't leave the Codex unfed, or it will consume everyone else. Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, what if there was a third option? What if you could feed the Codex without feeding the curse? How? The Codex wants words in its pages. It doesn't care what words, as long as they're written in blood ink. The curse wants the number 666 written 666 times. These are 2 separate hungers. What if you fed one but not the other? I began to understand. I could fill the pages with my testimony, with this warning, with anything that's not the curse. The Codex would be satisfied because it would have words. But the dark promise would be denied because the number would never be written. Exactly. It's not perfect. The Codex prefers curses, prefers dark promises and forbidden knowledge. Your testimony might not satisfy it completely, but it might satisfy it enough. Enough to prevent the catastrophic release. Enough to buy time until the next scribe arrives. And then that scribe will face the same impossible choice. Elias nodded sadly. Yes. This is the cycle, Jonathan. This is what St. Malachis really is, a prison where the innocent are sacrificed to contain the guilty. It's been this way for 100 years, since the Codex was first bound and brought here. And it will continue this way until someone finds a way to destroy the book entirely. But no one has succeeded yet. Every attempt to burn it, to tear it, to unmake it has failed. The Codex cannot be destroyed. It can only be fed. I spent that night in prayer, asking God for guidance, for strength, for forgiveness for what I was about to do. Because I understood now that there were no good choices. Only degrees of evil. I could sacrifice myself to the curse and save thousands. I could sacrifice thousands to preserve my own soul. Or I could find a middle path, one that might not save everyone but might save some. I chose the middle path. For the next 6 days, I wrote without stopping. I barely slept. I barely ate. Brother Elias brought me food and water, which I consumed at the desk without pausing in my work. And I wrote everything I knew about the blood ink, about the dark promise, about the curse that could not be completed. But I also wrote something else. I wrote about the scribes who had come before me, Brother Nathaniel, Brother Ambrose, the dozens of others whose names were carved on tombstones in the monastery cemetery. I wrote their stories, their struggles, their failures and small victories. I wrote to honor them, to make their sacrifices mean something beyond mere feeding of an insatiable hunger. And I wrote instructions. For whoever would come after me, for the next scribe who would sit at this blood-stained desk and face the same impossible choices. I told them everything I had learned. Every trick for resisting the ink. Every method for writing around the forbidden number. Every strategy for maintaining your soul in the face of something that wanted to consume it. The blood ink fought me every word. It tried to corrupt my text, to insert the number, to turn my testimony back into the curse it wanted. But I was relentless. And I had learned its patterns, its methods, its weaknesses. I knew now that the ink was powerful but not omnipotent. It could be resisted. It could be defied. It could be, if not defeated, at least held at bay. On the 6th day, as the winter solstice sun began to set, I wrote the final words of my testimony: to whoever reads this, the blood ink never dries because it is always hungry, always seeking, always wanting more. But hunger can be managed. Resist the completion. Deny the promise. Write your own truth, not the truth the ink wants you to write. And know that every word you write in defiance of the curse is a small victory, even if you never achieve complete freedom. We are scribes. We write. That is enough. I carried the completed pages down to the Codex Maleficarum in the chapel. The abbot and all the remaining monks were there, watching with expressions that mixed hope and dread. I opened the massive book to the first blank page and began carefully inserting my testimony, each page slotting into the binding as if the codex had been waiting for them. As each page joined the book, I felt something change. The air grew thicker, more oppressive, as if a great pressure was building. The codex was reading what I had written, judging it, deciding whether this offering was sufficient. When the last page was inserted, the codex slammed shut on its own, the sound echoing through the chapel like thunder. The oil lamps flickered. The temperature dropped until I could see my breath. And from the book came a sound, a groan of satisfaction mixed with frustration, as if the codex was both fed and disappointed by what it had received. The abbot approached the lectern and placed his hand on the codex. After a moment, he nodded. "It's accepted your offering," he said. "The immediate danger has passed. The curse will not be released. But Jonathan," he looked at me with something like pity, "you've only delayed the inevitable. In a few months, maybe a year, the codex will be hungry again. And it will demand more. It always demands more. Then you'll have to find another scribe," I said. "Because I'm done. I've paid my debt. I've given the codex what I had to give. And I'm leaving this place." The abbot's expression turned grave. "The blood ink is still in you. I can see it on your hands. If you leave, it will follow you. It will corrupt everything you write for the rest of your life. Every letter, every word, every document, the number will appear, hidden in your script, spreading like disease. You'll infect others with the curse without meaning to. Is that what you want?" I looked down at my hands. The red stain had faded to barely visible traces, but it was still there, still warm to the touch, still alive. The abbot was right. I carried the curse with me now. I was a vector for its spread. "Then I'll never write again," I said. "I'll find other work. I'll labor with my hands in ways that don't require a quill. I'll speak my truth instead of writing it. I'll find a way to live without feeding the hunger." "You're a scribe," the abbot said softly. "Not writing will be its own kind of death." "Maybe," I agreed. "But it's a death I choose. And that makes all the difference." I walked out of St. Malachy's that night, carrying nothing but the clothes on my back and the terrible knowledge in my mind. Behind me, the monastery stood dark and brooding against the winter sky, its bell tower empty, its halls filled with the echoes of scribes who had come before me and failed. But I had not failed. Not entirely. I had resisted the dark promise. I had refused to write the number, even knowing the cost. And I had left behind a testament, a warning, a roadmap for the next poor soul who would be lured to that place with promises of peace and purpose. The blood ink never dries. That's what I learned in my weeks at St. Malachy's. It never dries because it's always waiting, always hungry, always seeking the next scribe to consume. But it also never dries because truth never fully sets. The testimony I left behind is still wet, still fresh, still alive with warning for anyone who reads it. I never wrote again after leaving the monastery. I kept my promise to myself. I became a laborer, working with my hands in ways that required no script, no documentation, no engagement with the written word. It was hard, God, it was so hard, to silence the part of me that wanted to record, to document, to write. But I did it. Because the alternative was to risk spreading the curse, to risk creating more Brother Nathaniels, more victims of the blood ink's insatiable hunger. But I did speak. I told my story to anyone who would listen. I became a kind of oral historian, spreading the warning through words spoken instead of written. Some thought me mad. Some thought me drunk. But some, a few, understood. And those few spread the warning further, creating a web of spoken testimony that reached far beyond what any written document could achieve. That's why I'm telling you this now. Why I've entrusted this story to those who will speak it rather than write it, who will record it in ways that don't require the cursed blood ink. Because the dark promise is still out there. The Codex Maleficarum still hungers. And St. Malachy still stands in those Virginia mountains, waiting for the next scribe to arrive, seeking peace and finding only the eternal repetition of an impossible task. If you're a scribe, if you work with words and ink and paper, be wary of opportunities that seem too perfect. Be suspicious of monasteries that offer peace and purpose. Be careful of red ink that moves on its own, that never fully dries, that seems to know what you're thinking before you think it. And if you ever find yourself at a desk stained with blood, holding a quill that screams when it touches paper, facing a manuscript that demands you write the number 666, remember my story. Remember that completion is impossible. Remember that the only way to win is to refuse to play. The blood ink never dries because some hungers are eternal. But so is resistance. So is defiance. So is the human capacity to say no in the face of overwhelming pressure to surrender. I've been free of St. Malachy's for 20 years now. The stain on my hands has faded to nothing visible, though sometimes, in certain light, I can still see the shadow of it. And sometimes, late at night, I dream that I'm back in that scriptorium, back at that blood-stained desk, with the quill in my hand and the number waiting to be written. But I always wake before I write it. And that small victory, repeated every night for 20 years, is enough. It has to be enough. Because the alternative, the eternal repetition of 665 instances, forever one away from completion, forever trapped in the almost of fulfillment, is a fate worse than death. It's a fate worse than hell. It's the transformation of the soul into nothing but hunger and failure and endless, meaningless repetition. Brother Nathaniel is still there, I think. Still in the ink. Still trying to write that 666th instance. Still believing, despite everything, that this time might be different. That this time he might succeed. He won't. The curse was designed to ensure he never does. And that's the most horrifying truth of all, not that evil exists, not that curses are real, not that there are forces in this world that want to consume us. The most horrifying truth is that we can become complicit in our own consumption. We can choose to feed the hunger. We can convince ourselves that completion is possible, that freedom lies just on the other side of one more repetition, one more attempt, one more try. The dark promise isn't that you'll gain power by writing the number 666 times. The dark promise is that you'll believe completion is possible. That belief is the real curse. And breaking it, truly breaking it, requires accepting that some things cannot be finished, some tasks cannot be completed, some hungers cannot be satisfied. I learned to live with incompletion, with the knowledge that my testimony in the Codex was imperfect, that my resistance was partial, that my victory was incomplete. And in that acceptance, I found something the ink could never corrupt, peace with imperfection, freedom in the acknowledgement that I am flawed, limited, unable to complete the impossible tasks the world sets before me. The blood ink wanted me to be perfect, to write flawlessly, to complete the curse exactly as designed. By accepting my own imperfection, by embracing my limitations, by refusing to strive for the impossible completion it promised, I became free. If you take nothing else from my story, take this: perfection is a trap. Completion is a lie. The only truth is in the imperfect struggle, in the incomplete effort, in the eternal process of trying without ever expecting to fully succeed. The blood ink never dries because it represents our desire for permanent achievement, for lasting legacy, for words that will endure forever. But nothing endures forever. Everything fades. Everything fails. Everything is, in the end, incomplete. And that's okay. That's more than okay. That's beautiful. Because it means we're free to fail, free to be imperfect, free to write our own truths without needing them to be eternal or complete or perfect. The number 666 has no power except what we give it. The dark promise has no hold except what we accept. The blood ink never dries, but we don't have to write with it. We can choose different ink, different words, different stories. We can choose to be imperfect, incomplete, and utterly, beautifully free. That's my final testimony. That's what I learned in the blood-stained scriptorium of St. Malachy's monastery. And that's what I offer to you now, not written in cursed ink but spoken in living words, passed from voice to voice, from story to story, from imperfect human to imperfect human. The curse ends when we stop trying to complete it. The hunger ends when we stop feeding it. The ink dries when we walk away from the page and refuse to return. I walked away. And I've been free ever since. May you find the courage to walk away from whatever cursed pages await you in your own life. May you find peace in incompletion. And may you never, ever write the number that promises everything and delivers only eternal, meaningless repetition. The blood ink never dries. But we don't have to let it write our stories. We can write our own, in our own time, in our own way, with our own imperfect, incomplete, beautiful truths. And that, in the end, is enough. More than enough. It's everything.